started as a ghost frequency. In the world of professional audio engineering, we call it the hum. Most people ignore it, attributing it to power lines or distant traffic. But Elias knew better. He had been tracking this specific resonance for 6 months, a frequency that did not appear on any official spectrum. It sat exactly at 1924 Ards, just below the threshold of human hearing, but high enough to trigger a primal sense of dread. Again, Elias whispered, his fingers trembling as he adjusted the slider on his analog mixing board. The waveform on his monitor wasn't a sin wave. It was jagged, like teeth. As he boosted the gain, the air in the basement grew unnaturally cold. His breath misted in front of him. Then, through the static of a shortwave radio from 1944, a voice broke through. It wasn't speaking English. It wasn't speaking any language recorded in history. It was a rhythmic, guttural clicking, metallic and wet. Suddenly, every digital clock in the room began to count backward. The town of Blackwood Creek was famous for two things, its dense fog and its high suicide rate. But Elias realized the suicides weren't what they seemed. He pulled up a map of the town on his screen. Every disappearance in the last 50 years occurred exactly along the path of an underground tectonic fault line. He overlaid his frequency data onto the map. The jagged waveform matched the fault line perfectly. The ground wasn't just shifting, it was broadcasting. His phone buzzed. It was a FaceTime call from an unknown number. He answered. The screen was pitch black, but the audio was crystal clear. It was the clicking sound from the radio. Then, a small, frail voice whispered, "Elias, it's dark here, but they have many eyes." It was Lily, the girl who had vanished 3 days ago. "Lily, where are you?" Elias shouted, his heart hammering against his ribs. The camera on the other end flipped. It showed a reflection in a dark mirror. Lily was standing in what looked like her own bedroom, but the colors were inverted. The walls were bleeding black ink, and behind her, a tall, faceless figure made of static was reaching out. The call ended with a sound like shattering glass. Elias realized the frequency wasn't just a sound, it was a carrier wave for consciousness. The town's infrastructure, the power lines, the Wi-Fi routers, the smart fridges, was being used as a giant antenna to broadcast a digital curse. He went to the local library to find the town's founding charters. He found a diary from 1892, written by a man named Thomas Thorne. Thorne was a telegraph operator who claimed he started hearing the voice of the abyss through the copper wires. "The copper is a bridge," Thorne had written. "They cannot enter our world physically, so they enter through our signals. Once you hear them, you are a host. Once you see them, you are the door." Elias felt a sharp pain in his ears. He touched them, and his hand came away red. He was bleeding from his ear canals. He looked at his reflection in the library window. For a split second, his own face vanished, replaced by a mask of gray static. "I'm the door," he gasped. He had to stop the broadcast. If the frequency reached the main cell tower on the hill, it would hit every smartphone in the state. Millions of doors opening at once. He grabbed a sledgehammer and began smashing his digital equipment. He destroyed the monitors, the CPUs, the routers, but the clicking didn't stop. It started coming from his own throat. Click, 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 static. He looked at his analog shortwave radio. It had no battery. It was unplugged. Yet the dial was glowing with a sickly violet light. The voice was now a scream, slowed down 1,000 times. "Elias, open! Us!" He realized the frequency had already moved. It wasn't in the machines anymore. It was in his nervous system. Every pulse of his heart was a signal. Every blink of his eyes was a frame of data. He grabbed a can of gasoline, intending to end it all, when his basement door creaked open. Standing there was his neighbor, a kind old lady named Mrs. Gable. She was holding a tray of cookies, but her eyes were gone. In their place were two small, buzzing speakers. "Elias," she said, her voice a perfect digital recreation of his mother's. "Don't be a hero. The signal is beautiful. Just listen." She stepped into the room, and behind her, the shadows began to detach from the walls. They weren't ghosts. They were Signal Wraiths. Entities made of pure information, hungry for a physical host. Elias backed away, his hand fumbling for the lighter. As the Wraiths lunged, his phone, which he thought he had smashed, suddenly lit up. A notification appeared. Broadcast commencing. 99% complete. To be continued in Part 2. The lighter flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, the clicking grew deafening. It wasn't coming from the room anymore. It was coming from inside Elias's skull. Mrs. Gable's jaw dropped unnaturally wide, and a stream of black, viscous liquid, like liquid silicon, poured out, crawling toward Elias like it had a mind of its own. "Elias!" Her voice glitched, switching between his mother, his dead father, and a distorted electronic roar. "Why resist? The frequency is the only truth. Your flesh is just a biological hard drive. Let us reformat you." Elias grabbed a heavy metal canister of contact cleaner and sprayed it at the liquid. He struck the lighter one last time. Whoosh! The flames erupted, momentarily pushing back the shadows. He didn't wait. He scrambled up the basement stairs, locking the heavy oak door behind him. From the other side, he heard a sound that made his blood turn to ice. 1,000 digital voices screaming in perfect unison. The town was awake, but it was silent. No dogs barking, no cars honking. Elias looked through a window as he drove past the local diner. Inside, 20 people were sitting perfectly still, staring at their smartphones. Their faces were illuminated by that same sickly violet light. They weren't scrolling, they weren't typing, they were syncing. Suddenly, all 20 heads turned at the exact same millisecond to look at his truck. Their eyes were glowing with a digital white static. "The cell tower," Elias gasped, gripping the steering wheel. "They're using the main 5G hub on the ridge to broadcast the final sequence." He looked at his analog watch. 3:33 a.m. According to Thomas Thorne's diary, the void is strongest when the natural world is at its quietest. If the broadcast hits 100%, the frequency won't just be in Blackwood Creek. It will jump to the satellites. It will hit London, New York, Tokyo. A global lobotomy delivered via signal. The museum was cold. The smell of dust and old copper was thick. Elias frantically searched for the original Thorne transmitter, a massive brass and coil beast that ran on raw electricity, not microchips. As he searched, the museum's intercom crackled to life. "You think you're the hero, Elias?" It was the voice of the town's sheriff, but distorted, layered with 1,000 other whispers. "You're just a bug in the code. We've been here since the first wire was laid in the ground. We are the ghost in your machines. We are the thoughts you think are your own." A figure emerged from the shadows. It was the sheriff, but his skin looked like it was vibrating. His movements were frame-dropped, like a lagging video game character. He lunged at Elias with impossible speed. Elias swung a heavy brass telegraph key, catching the sheriff in the temple. Instead of blood, sparks flew. The sheriff's face glitched, revealing a mess of wires and black bile underneath. He wasn't human anymore. He was a signal wraith in a skin suit. The air around the tower was vibrating so hard that Elias's nose began to bleed again. He carried the Thorne transmitter on his back, connected to a heavy-duty car battery. As he climbed the service ladder, the world around him began to pixelate. The trees looked like low-resolution blocks. The sky was tearing, revealing a void of pure static behind the clouds. The frequency was rewriting reality itself. He reached the control platform. The main server rack was pulsing with a heartbeat. "Elias!" a voice screamed from above. He looked up. Lily, the missing girl, was suspended in the center of the tower's dishes by webs of glowing fiber-optic cables. She wasn't a prisoner. She was the antenna. Her small body was being used to bridge the gap between the void and the world. "Lily, I'm coming." "Don't!" she cried, her eyes leaking black fluid. "If you stop the signal, I die. If you don't, everyone becomes like me. Please. Elias, cut the wire." Elias looked at his transmitter. He had one chance to broadcast a white noise burst that would fry the tower, but it would also fry the nervous system of anyone directly connected to it. He looked at Lily. He looked at the horizon, where the lights of the next city were visible. His phone in his pocket, cracked and broken, suddenly vibrated with a final notification. Broadcast strength, 99.9%, global upload initializing. The sound of a massive electrical surge drowns out everything. Screen turns to pure white static. To be continued in Part 3. Elias stood on the edge of the platform, his lungs burning. Every breath felt like inhaling ground glass. Below him, the town of Blackwood Creek was no longer a town. It was a glowing grid of violet light. Thousands of synchronized citizens stood in their yards, faces upturned, mouths open, acting as biological repeaters for the signal. The air was so thick with electromagnetic energy it looked like liquid static, and the metal structure of the tower flickered in and out of existence. Lily's voice came from the speakers of the tower itself, echoing across the valley. Her body was barely visible, wrapped in glowing fiber-optic veins. "It's too late, Elias. The void has the architecture. It doesn't need the wires anymore, it has the people." Elias looked at his Thorne transmitter. The car battery leaked acid, the copper coils glowing white-hot. He knew the theory. A harmonic resonance at exactly the opposite frequency of the hum could shatter the connection, but the feedback loop would be lethal. A shadowy figure began to form out of the static behind Lily. It had no face, only a vertical slit of blinding white light where a mouth should be. Small, fragile Elias, it spoke, the sound like 1,000 hard drives crashing at once. You fight for a world that has already moved on. Your race built this cage of signals. You invited us in with every connect button you pressed. Why save a world so desperate to be consumed? Elias didn't answer. He was wiring his transmitter directly into the tower's main power feed. His hands bled, his skin charred by the raw voltage. You're just data, Elias, the figure continued, stepping closer as the platform under Elias's feet began turning into low-resolution blocks. In 10 seconds, the global upload completes. The humans in London will wake up, but they won't be humans. They will be nodes in our network. A world without pain, a world without death, only the signal. Elias looked at Lily. She was crying, but her tears were black digital ink. Do it, Elias, she whispered. Break the world before they finish the upload. He knew he wouldn't survive. The transmitter needed a grounding source the metal tower couldn't provide. It needed a heartbeat to sync the counterpulse. He grabbed the 2 main copper leads, ready to use his own body as the final bridge. I'm not saving the world. Elias gritted his teeth, his eyes beginning to glow with a fierce natural blue. I'm just turning off the noise. He slammed the leads together. A deafening low-frequency boom shook everything. A wave of pure white light erupted from the center of the tower. It wasn't fire, it was anti-static. As the pulse hit the air, the violet glow of the town below was instantly snuffed out. The Signal Wraiths, screaming in the streets, vanished like smoke in a gale. The faceless figure shrieked, its body pixelating into nothingness. The fiber optic veins around Lily snapped and she fell into Elias's arms. But the energy was too much. Elias's body was being overwritten. His memories, his mother's face, the smell of rain, the sound of his own name, were being converted into zeros and ones and then deleted. Lily woke up on the cold metal grating. The tower was a charred, silent skeleton. The humming was gone. The sun was rising over the ridge, but it looked different, natural, soft, without the digital filter. She looked for Elias, but all that remained was his old analog watch and a pile of gray ash that looked like burnt silicon. She looked down at the town. The people were waking up, rubbing their eyes, dropping their phones. The blue glow was gone, but as she picked up Elias's watch, she noticed something. It was analog. Mechanical gears and springs. It shouldn't have been affected. But the second hand wasn't moving forward. It was twitching. Short, long, short. Morse code. Lily held the watch to her ear. Through the ticking of the gears, she heard a faint, tiny voice. It wasn't a signal. It was a ghost. Stay? Offline. She looked at her own hands. Under the skin of her palm, a tiny violet spark flickered for a second, then disappeared. The tower was dead, but the frequency had left a mark. High above, in the silent vacuum of space, a satellite, one that Elias couldn't reach, suddenly turned its dish toward the Earth. On its internal monitor, a single line of text appeared. Host recovery incomplete. Searching for new bioantenna. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see what happens next in Part 4, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you don't miss it.